Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. Well, this talk's come out partly from the experience of this year, I guess, and also a mixture of that and one of the ceremonies we do and made me reflect on an aspect of what we mean by protection. The ceremony I'm talking about is called Tenking, which means heavenly guardian, and it's done at about 10:15 at night every evening, and we're on the rota because you basically have to stay up till 11, which is late for people who, as monks, who need to get up quite early. And you go around and lock all the doors and make sure the lights that switched off are switched off, and the ones that need to remain switched on are switched on. And then you do 3 little ceremonies in the Zendo, the ceremony hall building. You walk around and lock the doors, and then at the end of the round, you do a kind of blessing, a little blessing ceremony. And I'll show. Oh, that's funny. Huh. I get the reverse image, but you'll probably get the correct image. But we do this ceremony like this, standing up. You know, can you see? I'll stand back a bit. It's like a big circle. That's better. Three circles, yeah. And you do that standing at the temple gate. And when I've been doing it, I've often been struck by how, even though it's a kind of ceremony of protection, and you when you do that mudra, that gesture, you're supposed to wish for the safe night of the temple and all those who are staying in the temple, and for all beings, kind of thing. You know, wishing everyone a good night's sleep partly, and also, you know, free from disasters. But it's always felt to me like a gesture of being very open. It's not like a gesture of pushing away the bad things or keeping all the nasty people away from the temple. Obviously, we are practical. We do actually lock the doors, but it feels very much like a gesture of openness. And that seems to have been resonating with this year. You know, protection has been very much, well, we probably had to think about it too much, haven't we, I imagine. I know I've been going back to visiting one of the monks in a care home about once a week, and you know, going in there's like, you know, you wait outside and then someone hands you first of all, you have to put a face mask on before you can even go in the porch, and then someone hands you a swab kit for the dual flow test, and then you have to swab yourself, go away for half an hour, and then come back and then put on a new face mask, also plastic gloves and a plastic apron that covers almost all your body. So you think, oh, luckily they're incredibly welcoming there. Actually, there is a way of doing all this which is quite welcoming as well. You feel a bit like you know, a contaminant if you're not careful. So there is a need to protect ourselves. I'm not denying that, and I'm just kind of thinking about the effects of that long term and how it relates to being open, really. Because you can't really separate body and mind, actually. And I've noticed sometimes, you know, when I've been, first time I went to the care home, I don't think they'd seen any visitors for 3 months, and people were shrinking away from me. And so you get that kind of difficult feelings, I suppose. And how does protection relate to being open? I guess that's the question that the ceremony has brought up for me. And I think also we're probably going to have to consider the effects, aren't we, of the COVID outbreak on our the way we are with other people. You know, can we be open with other people and still kind of socially distancing, quotes? And I expect people who get used to it are managing that fine. I think they are some of the nurses at the care home are. I think for those monks, it might take a little while to get used to just seeing other beings, actually, that we do miss you tremendously. And so how can we be open, and how does that relate to being protected? Yeah, it also seems to be a gesture, you know, the blessing, I call it a blessing, of respect for the world, because when I do it, you know, you're facing outside the throttle gate is now a beech tree, and sometimes we're managing to keep fairly clear skies and we don't have too many lights on, so you see all this dust of stars. It's quite beautiful, and so it's like a great respect for the whole universe, somehow, existence, and a feeling of allowing in a sense, the teaching that's there at that moment, you know, just the beech tree, you know, you can see the Milky Way sometimes, allowing that in. And yet it is it is a protection ceremony. So how, you know, how does that relate? It's not pushing away at all. And when I call it blessing, it's not like I'm blessing things and making them blessed, you know. It's almost like the tree is already blessed, and you know, the stars are already blessed, if you want to use this old-fashioned word. Actually, I quite like the word blessed. It's kind of beautiful. And it's acknowledging, it's just respecting that which it already is. It's a recognition, in a sense. So to try and answer my own question, how does protection relate to being completely open to things? The ceremony itself seems to open you up to something quite deep. And I'm not making any special claims, you know, that only if you do the ceremony can you be open to this, but it's just, it's another way of pointing. And that movement of, you know, turning the wheel is also made at funerals, interestingly enough. Some of you have been to funerals here probably realize we do, you know, when the body's, just before the body is being lowered into the grave, you'll do three circles one way and 3 circles the other way. And in a way, the circle represents emptiness, which I think Reverend Master Ji perhaps translated emptiness a bit better as a non-substantial liberated existence. So the circle's got that meaning. It's also the movement, clockwise movement, is the oneness of birth, death, and nirvana. There's all those elements in the gesture. So I think the safety aspect, the protection aspect, comes from seeing at the moment of doing the ceremony, at the moment of, you know, the tree just being there, the stars just being there, and kind of bowing to existence. There is the sense that there isn't really a separate self or a separate thing that I need to protect. The substantiality of it is less. Because the need to protect yourself often comes from the need to protect something that we definitely feel we have, a substantial self. As soon as there's a very strong sense of an I that must have something to define itself, then fear seems to arise almost automatically. Now, if you define yourself by your position, your status, or your relationships, then there seems to be a very subtle fear that creeps in as soon as you start investing in those definitions of yourself. And releasing that fear into the openness is an aspect of just blessing what is there. And there's no sense of a contest or like a kind of exorcism type attitude. It's just bowing to what is there. It could be our own fear at the moment. It could be the stars and the tree. There's no need to defeat fear. I think to expand out from this, I've been realizing myself recently that the more you build up an image of yourself and feel you need to protect it, the more difficult you make your own life. And sometimes you have to allow yourself to be a bit more vulnerable, to just to keep going in a kind of sane sort of way. I've noticed if I try and hold on to an image of myself, you know, some of you will realize I'm the vice abbot at the moment, and I have a special vice abbot's chair in the center, which is, you know, like in one of the corners, and it's quite prominent in some ways, not as prominent as the abbot's chair, of course, quite rightly. But if you, sometimes I feel, oh crumbs, you know, I feel terrible this morning, but I'm sitting there and I've got to look the part, you know, I've got to look, you know, strong as a mountain, and you know, you know, the person with no doubts and fears. And I think we, luckily enough, I doubt if that's true. Actually, I doubt if I do need to protect myself or project that image. I think we're quite a small community. We probably know each other well enough not to need to do that, but nevertheless, it arises. And if you hold on to that image of yourself, there is that, as I said, subtle fear that arises, that because having something means it can be taken away, or feeling you must have something. Immediately it comes with this subtle kind of sadness or suffering, the sense that it could be removed. And I think we have to keep releasing that holding on to position in the same way as I've mentioned, in terms of just blessing the temple, blessing the tree, blessing the stars. I know that sounds a bit kind of new agey in some ways, but actually there is a tree out there, and quite often beautiful starscape. So we release our own fear of loss, of losing status, by just blessing the whole situation, perhaps, you know, encircling it. It's just still part of the wheel in a positive sense. So that these are the times when we can allow ourselves to feel that great vulnerability, you know, acknowledge that I'm not necessarily feeling great sitting there. I might have times when I don't feel I'm doing the job very well. If we can just bless that, hold it within the circle, then there is the acknowledgement that it is in fact already blessed. There's that recognition. And there's less fear of further things that might be hiding in our proverbial closet, you know, our proverbial unconscious mind. There's less fear of that because we know that whatever arises, it can be blessed. So this question of, you know, what's the relationship between protection and vulnerability and openness seems to boil down to what is it that needs protecting. And if at the moment of doing the blessing, there is no separation between me and the world, then what is this being? So it's not a matter of getting rid of this self, though, this sense of a substantial self, in order to be one with the world. I think that's very important because people read about no self and see it as a very high stage, which no doubt it is. So they think, right, I must work on no self. So every time the self arises, I've got to say, right, it shouldn't be there. But that's not how it works. We cannot. The self does exist, actually, and it's very useful, incredibly useful. It's just that we have to realize it's non-substantial and kind of permeable to the rest of existence, other people. And being permeable just means that you're made up of interactions to some extent, to a very large extent. So the self does exist, but we exist as the meeting point of lots of interactions, the environment, other people. So we're not trying to get rid of the self in order to be at one with the world, but it's just the self with all its worries, doubts and fears is already included in that kind of encircling recognition or blessing. I sometimes come back to this quote, one of my favorite quotes from the Wild White Goose from Master Master diaries of a training in Sojoji in Japan. And she's asked to do this examination. It's called the Seikyoshi exam by her master. And in one of her answers, she says, I'll just read this out. The German philosopher Eckhart said that a man shall become truly free and as pure as the day he was born, when he has nothing, wants nothing, and knows nothing. Therefore, if a man knows he is enlightened, he is not, for he still clings to the knowledge of knowing. Therefore, not to know is not to need, and not to need, know, or have is to manifest the true self, which needs nothing adding to itself and nothing taken away from it. That's kind of nice, actually, because she's saying we don't get rid of the self, we just manifest the true self, which maybe the true self is that relationship between this and other. Recognition that there isn't the barriers are permeable. Yeah, so being truly free is when we have nothing, want nothing, and know nothing, which is like the ultimate invulnerability, isn't it? In a way, the ultimate recognition of our seeming inadequacy. But as I said, I think at the moment of doing these things, at the moment of kind of making gasho, or at the moment of seeing, recognizing Buddha nature in others, there isn't that sense of inadequacy, even though there is great humility.